Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the TMT webinar for the scheme of arrangement. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the custodians of this land on which we gather today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and their elders past and present. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and the region. We also want to acknowledge the Yungana people as the custodians of the land on which TMT holds tenure, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. With that, I'd like to hand over to your presenter today, which is Ian Prentice.
Thank you very much, Shane. Welcome everybody onto this webinar. I'd like to also introduce my fellow director, Joe Gaines, who's going to be available later in the webinar to answer any questions as we go through. The webinar here is really designed to enable us to discuss the scheme booklet and provide a little bit more context around that. It doesn't take away the need for everyone to read the scheme booklet themselves, but it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to touch on the key aspects of the scheme booklet and also an opportunity for Q&A. So the format, I'll go through this presentation 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll go straight into the Q&A. There are some pre-submitted questions, but there's also an opportunity throughout the webinar for you to submit questions as we go through, and our moderator will read those questions out as we go. With that, I'll start the presentation. Our obligatory disclaimer that this is now available on the ASX website and our platform as well, so you can read that at your leisure. Next one. This is a key disclaimer relative to the scheme booklet. So really, as I said, it's really important that shareholders read the scheme booklet in full and look at all the advantages and disadvantages of the experts and the experts report, and also seek their own individual advice as they choose to or require to. So an important aspect. Now, as I say, you'll be able to put questions into the platform as we go through the webinar. So this is the screen you should be able to see, so you can type your questions in at any stage, and Shane will be able to pick those up and ask those at the end of the Q&A, subject to time. Also subject to the scheme booklet and I guess the parameters around that. So there may be some questions that we need to take on notice, and we'll get back to you on, but we'll endeavour to answer as many questions as we possibly can through that Q&A platform. Now, really importantly, TMT and AVL have got very much a shared focus. We've been working on our respective projects for a number of years independently, but we've always had the same goals, very much around getting vanadium into the market, being a primary vanadium producer, aiming at being part of the carbon emission reduction and decarbonisation of the globe, and the very important role that vanadium will play in that aspect. So we very much have a shared mission, and I guess really through all this process is really bringing that together and being able to really deliver on that shared mission. So a little bit of the background on the scheme. Now, I'd say this is all in the scheme booklet, so you can read this at your leisure outside of this webinar, but it is important for us to put a bit of context around the history and how this all came to be. Now, we were approached by AVL in August of this year with a non-binding indicative offer. As it says in the scheme booklet, that was initially at a 10.27 AVL shares to every TMT share. The board at that time took the view that wasn't something that we wanted to put to our shareholders, but we thought it was very worthy of continuing to negotiate and have some due diligence process with AVL to see where we could get to. And ultimately, we got to a point by the end of September where we reached an agreement between the two boards on a 12 AVL shares to 1 TMT share. So that was unanimously supported by the TMT board, and really the concept is make sure we put that to our shareholders and give the shareholders the opportunity to vote on that and make a decision on that basis. Now, as we announced in September, there's 26% of our register came out in support of the scheme, and so that was an initial, obviously a very strong supporting position. Subsequent to that, and it's important to note that we have had a number of shareholders have indicated that they aren't necessarily supportive of the scheme as it stands, and again, that's all detailed in the scheme booklet. There's around 17% of the register in aggregate that have indicated to us their intention to vote against in the absence of a superior proposal. Now, as I say, the directors have unanimously recommended that TMT shareholders vote in favour of this scheme, subject to a superior proposal, and also subject to the independent expert continuing to conclude that the scheme is in the best interest of our shareholders. The independent expert report is in the scheme booklet, and again, really encourage you to make sure you read that and understand that and ask any advisors questions around that. The independent expert has deemed the transaction not fair but reasonable, but importantly in the best interest of our shareholders. On that basis, each of the directors holding TMT shares intends to vote in favour of the scheme, and the board's position remains unanimous in support of the scheme. I think, again, a bit of context around where we've got to in this process. Again, it's really important for shareholders to understand that the TMT board and management have gone through quite a significant market sounding process. So over the last year or so, with various advisors, including Argonaut and Sternship, we've gone to the market and spoken to a range of strategic investors, a range of other corporates, really around looking for partners and support in developing our MTMP project. And look, in summary from that, that process didn't result in us getting any proposals. And the real strong feedback from all that was, put the two projects together, combine it into one, and then there's a really big opportunity for those various strategic people to get involved in one consolidated project. So again, a really, I guess, strong point for the board to take the merger proposal very, very seriously. Now, key benefits of the scheme. Now, again, this is all in the scheme booklet, but it is one of the most logical mergers from a project technical aspect. So consolidation of the single ore body into one ownership, and then be able to develop that as one. Very, very important. We will have one of the largest and highest grade vanadium deposits in the world. You can see the two individual mineral resources there. You can put that together and see a very, very large resource base at very, very good grades. But beyond that, what does that mean on the ground? Well, there's going to be some great opportunities to optimise the mining and processing schedules, optimising around the project infrastructure and the capital costs for development of the project, and really importantly, optimisation of the current Yarrabubba mineral resource within the MTMP, and I'll touch on that a bit further in. But that's an important aspect from a synergy benefit coming through. Now, we have formed a technical working group that we announced back at the end of September, and the key technical people from both teams, both companies, have been working together diligently over the last period of time to really understand what this project looks like as an integrated deposit. So again, the key benefits of the scheme. So alleviation of the tenure constraints. So we have got one ore body that's been divided between two sets of tenure. One of the key aspects for us is at Yarrabubba, we are completely surrounded. TMT's Yarrabubba is completely surrounded by AVL tenure. It's important again, I think, to clarify, we did put a reserve out on Yarrabubba in August of 2022, and in that reserve disclosure, we talked about the constraints around that from a tenement point of view, what that meant from how we would develop our Yarrabubba deposit as a standalone deposit. We also talked about the access that we have currently in place between the Yarrabubba deposit and the Sandstone Road, so the ability for us as a standalone developer of that Yarrabubba deposit to get our ore from that ore body out onto the highway and up to the processing plant. But it was very clear in that release back in August 22 that there was somewhat of a compromised solution. We have got a reserve, and it's been signed off by a competent person, and it is a viable reserve, but it involves us having to backfill the pit to manage our waste. So that whole situation gets resolved through the merger. So we'll have the access to the tenure to make sure we can actually absolutely maximise the resource extraction for Yarrabubba, and that's going to be, in our view, going to be a very, very significant benefit for the combined shareholder base. We have, I guess, over the last 12 or 18 months, also been working actively on looking at alternatives for that, so that we can find alternatives for our waste management beyond the Yarrabubba tenure itself, but also beyond the AVL tenure. And unfortunately, to date, there's been no outcome. So this completion of the scheme will enable us to immediately resolve that and find, I guess, deliver up that solution for our waste management. Just as a reminder, the slide up here, just again, any questions, please just enter them straight into the app there. And also the disclaimer there around making sure that you do read the scheme booklet. It's very, very important that shareholders are fully aware of all the content, the advantages and the disadvantages in the scheme booklet. So key benefits of the scheme from our point of view, and I've already touched on some of those things, but there's certainly that consolidation aspect and being able to develop the ore body as one. But we also very, very firmly believe that it's going to have a much greater ability to access larger pools of capital. So significantly enhanced prospect of securing the funding required to build this significant project. So we've had feedback from a range of different investors over the journey to say, we'd really love to see this consolidated, and then there's the opportunity then to actually provide some significant funding to that. One of those key ones is our major shareholder and AVL's major shareholder, RCF, that owns sort of around 18% of both companies. So they're very keen to support the development of this deposit, and so having it consolidated in one ownership is really, really important in that aspect. From a TMT shareholder point of view, we also then, through the merger, we get the benefits of AVL's $49 million government grant. And again, really, really important, and understanding how that can really support the development of not just the ore body, but also the downstream side of the ambition for our project to get into the electrolyte and the battery space. We're also, as part of our process of assessing the merger, looked at, well, what is the opportunities as a standalone entity? Now, clearly, any small resource company is going to be not constantly, but will require capital. So there's going to be future capital raisings. And I suppose the risk that we looked at is, well, do we maintain the support of our major institutional shareholders if we're not going through with the merger, if we're not successful in this merger? And so one of the key, I guess, risk components that we looked at is making sure that we do maintain that support of our major institutional shareholders. Certainly, some of the other key benefits, we will be, as a combined entity, in a much stronger position. So, pro forma market cap as of, I guess, the last practical date, which was last Friday. That's a technical term out of the scheme booklet, but the 1st of December is that date. About $186 million market cap and a pro forma of $55 million cash at the end of June of this year. So, a much stronger position combined than we would be as individuals, and that then puts us on different radars as far as investment opportunities. So the different institutional investors would have I guess a greater ability to invest into this story. If the scheme is approved and if we're successful in implementing the scheme, TMT shareholders will retain around a 38% interest in the merged group, and that means that you maintain exposure to the development of the project, but also the increased scale and the financial capability that is brought about by the merged group. So we also get additional liquidity. You get a larger company, you get more investors, and you start to get, I guess, that change of register and increased liquidity. We also see some real benefits in streamlining of project development, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions around this whole scope, around the environmental approvals, around the process to take our projects from where they are now into the development phase. But we very firmly have the view that by putting the two together, it does really make that whole project development pathway a lot smoother. There's not going to be the constant competition for, as I talked about earlier, about the capital, but also just the resources and the access to people and I guess, negotiation position in regards to, infrastructure, labour. We talk about offtake partners. Both companies have been pursuing a parallel path, talking to offtake partners. So to bring that together as one, I think is going to be really a big advantage of the scheme. but also the permitting and approval. So as we move through this process, we're talking as one voice on how we're going to develop the project, and we're not sort of overlapping on each other. So really important. And there is going to be certainly some removal of duplicated corporate overheads. I think that's, again, a key aspect. Importantly, the scheme consideration does represent a premium for our shares. So as shareholders in TMT, as we say, there will be 12 new AVL shares for every one TMT share. So as of last Friday, the last practical date in the scheme booklet, that represented about a 25% premium from the closing price on that day to the relative closing price of AVL. But also on the day that the proposed scheme was announced, it was around about a 27% premium to our 30-day VWAP. So there's certainly a premium in that consideration payable. And I guess we then look at, well, what happens in the instance of the scheme not going ahead. I suppose then each of the companies has to look at their own pathway forward, and also what does that mean from the general market support for each of those companies, and what is the risk on our share price in that aspect. One of the other real, I think, key benefits of the scheme, and one of the things I think has really come through in the last few months, particularly as the technical working groups got together and the integration teams got together on working how, what does the merged company look like, is the strength of both the board and senior management teams as we bring this together. Graham Arvidsson, the CEO of AVL, will remain in that position. I'll come on board to support the integration process as the executive of integration. Jo will come onto the AVL board and brings her fantastic experience and the qualities that we really identified when we asked Jo to join the TMT board. But down to the next layer of the people who are doing the work, doing the studies, moving the project forward, there's a really fantastic complementary team there that's going to come together and really support the delivery of the project. Once again, just a reminder, please, if you have some questions, please put them into the window there, and again, the disclaimer around the making sure you read the scheme booklet. Now, certainly, as I said at the beginning, we've got some shareholders who've indicated to us their intention to vote against the scheme as it currently stands if there's not a superior proposal. There's certainly reasons you may want to vote against the scheme. I've talked about the reasons why we think the scheme is something that we should be doing and why the board's unanimously supporting the scheme, but you may disagree with that, and that's obviously, as a shareholder, that's your prerogative. Now we're putting the scheme to the shareholders to vote and decide, so that's the whole process we're going through here, and all of these things are detailed, as I say, in the scheme booklet. There will be dilution. As TMT shareholders, we will end up owning 38% of the merged entity. As again, the TMT directors believe that is a fantastic position as far as we can then collectively bring this project to fruition, and the efficiency of bringing that project to fruition is really supportive of that. So there is a possibility of a superior proposal. I've got to say, we haven't had a superior proposal come through since the announcement of the scheme, and as I talked about earlier, we have gone through quite a rigorous process of engaging with potential strategic parties over the last 12 months or so, and as I said earlier, the consistent messaging is, if we can be put together, then there's a much better opportunity, a far more attractive opportunity. You may, as a shareholder, look at this as being a change in the risk profile from going from a TMT shareholder to being a shareholder in a merged AVL. There's certainly, I guess, there's things around taxation which I won't talk about, but that's also detailed in the scheme booklet, and it's a script for script consideration. So there's uncertain monetary value of what the script is going to be looking like on the day of completion. But again, I think that's more of a market type situation rather than the particular companies that we're talking about. I do make sure you refer to section 7 of the scheme booklet around the taxation advice, and make sure you've read that and understand that, and seek external advice as required. So with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Again, there's the window for you to put in your written questions, and I'll pass back over to Shane to look at progressing to the questions.
Thanks, Ian, for that presentation. Hopefully a very useful overview for shareholders and what is necessarily a quite detailed document in the form of the scheme booklet. Obviously, shareholders are advised to read the scheme booklet in full, including all advantages and disadvantages of the experts report, and seek their own individual advice, whether that be investment, tax or legal, if they so choose or require. We'll shortly open for Q&A with Ian and Joe, both with questions we've received from shareholders ahead of time and questions you can submit online now using the webinar chat. And the instructions on how to do so are up on screen now. For the Q&A, shareholders should be aware that a scheme of arrangement is a highly regulated process. As well as shareholder approval, there is a court approval requirement. It is very important that all communication with shareholders during the scheme is in accordance with the scheme booklet, which is now a court authorised document. For that reason, we may need to take some questions on notice and reply via email after the webinar, so we can make sure you receive answers that are correct rather than just quick. We also ask shareholders to understand there may be some questions that we simply can't answer in detail, as the information is not known to TMT just yet or not covered by the scheme booklet. This is also why TMT has been a bit limited about what it could or couldn't say about the scheme before the scheme booklet was approved. We will endeavour to reply to all shareholders though, and we ask you to understand the legal requirements that currently apply to TMT. We thought it was important to give shareholders this opportunity despite the potential restrictions of the scheme of arrangement process, as it is a feature of good governance to have two-way interaction with shareholders. And I know Ian was also keen to make sure he was available for questions. So with that understanding in place, I would now like to go to our first question. Now, Ian, I'll probably start with one where the answer may be we need to wait for the results of the technical committee. But the first question I'll give you from Graham. How is the gas line progressing? And if the merger goes ahead, will it still be needed, or will the merged company truck the ore to a planned site?
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, so we are continuing to engage with APA around the development of the gas pipeline, and the work stream that they've been working on has continued unabated through this process. So that's continuing. It's important for all of us that it continues on and we retain that optionality. I think as Shane alluded to, the working group, the technical working group, will define what the project looks like, and so the need for that gas pipeline and that whole development will come through the working group's outcomes, and that's as I say, that's in train. But importantly, we've maintained momentum with APA to make sure that we don't lose that optionality around developing that pipeline.
Thanks, Ian. I'll just collate a few questions here that we've received with respect to your EPA approval process. I don't know if you'd like to just provide a general sort of comment or status update on the EPA process.
Yep, thanks, Shane. Certainly it's a very topical and timely question. As it happens, the Gavanintha ERD was uploaded to the EPA website last Friday, which also happened to be the day of the finalisation of the scheme booklet. So what that means is that the EPA services team has completed their assessment or review of the ERD for Gavanintha and has accepted that as final. Now that now moves into the next stages of the EPA approval process. So now it has to go to the EPA board or to the EPA, which will then make the assessment and then make any recommendations or decisions around moving that forward, or whether they require additional information from us. So fantastic milestone for us to get that uploaded onto the EPA website and to be accepted in its form, but it is part of the journey. So we're continuing on that journey. I guess importantly, I think I've had some feedback from shareholders. Really important to understand that the ERD that we completed is for the Gavanintha footprint. The ERD was never to cover the Yarrabubba itself. So as you know, as TMT shareholders, we've got the large Gavanintha footprint where all the infrastructure will be built and two of the open pits will be developed, and then the separate Yarrabubba satellite deposit. we've been very focused on progressing the Cabinet ERD through the approvals pathway so that we've got the development ability to develop the processing plant and all the supporting infrastructure. But as yet, the Orebody has not been referred to the EPA, and that will happen in due course. And that will be, I guess, the next part of the approvals process.
Thanks, Ian. Again, I'll just group a few similar questions together. Would you like to give us a little bit of colour about the scheme booklet and, you know, the process that you have to go through to prepare that? Who, you know, has input into that? You know, how that drafting process works? Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, Shane. So certainly, we've engaged advisors to support us in the development of the scheme booklet and the progress of the proposed scheme. So we've got Argonaut PCF and Sternship advisors have been supporting us in the development of the scheme booklet, but also legal counsel, so DLA have been working with us to develop up that scheme booklet. So we've had a lot of, I guess, external advice and support in developing the scheme booklet for preparation to release. Importantly, to understand that schemes are highly regulated and they're actually a court process. So the scheme booklet had to then be presented to the court, and there was a court hearing on Monday of this week. And so, you know, I think Shane pointed out at the very beginning about the legalities of the whole scheme booklet. But yeah, what we put together in that scheme booklet, a lot of support in developing that scheme booklet, and then that was presented to the judge on Monday at the court hearing, and then we've got approval from there to submit that to the shareholders and call the meeting.
Thanks, Ian. I'll probably just collate a few other things as well, and if Joe wants to jump in at any time too in terms of when we're discussing the board, that's fine. There's been a few questions with respect to the independent expert's opinion, and I can see, you know, we've discussed that in the presentation as well. But I don't know if you wanted to just say a few words or give a bit of colour on the nature of the independent expert's opinion being not fair but reasonable for TMT shareholders.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Again, you know, it's a very highly regulated process, the independent expert process. So BDO was engaged as the independent expert after going through a process of assessing the parties to complete that process. They then engaged a technical expert to provide the independent technical advice that feeds into that process. So there was, I guess, a lot of work done by the technical expert at looking at both companies, resources in particular, and developing a valuation metric around that to a measure of that. So, but it's important to understand that the valuation was based on, I guess the fairness was really around applying a control premium to the TMT valuation, and that was where I guess the fairness or the not fair opinion came from, applying that control premium to the valuation that was derived for a TMT share. But as we say, the expert then opined that, albeit the valuation was not deemed to be fair, the scheme was deemed to be reasonable in the advantages of completing the scheme outweighed the disadvantages, and so therefore it was deemed to be reasonable and in the best interest of shareholders.
Thanks, Ian. Joe, you're nominated to join the AVL board should the scheme be approved. Do you want to give us a few thoughts on you know, why you want to join the AVL board and the future that you see there?
Thanks for the question, Shane. On joining the TMT board, I was really excited about vanadium and the opportunities that vanadium has for us as a community in terms of the response to the energy needs of not only Australia but worldwide, and the need to decarbonise. Vanadium and the technology that it creates with longer storage batteries, I think, is a really important part of the solution. And going forward, the opportunity to be on a board which continues to promote vanadium in Australia, but also allows us to look at further downstream processing opportunities. I think it's a really important and exciting way forward for both for shareholders and for the company.
Thanks, Jo. I'll again just group some questions with some similar themes, and that's with respect to future vanadium demand. One question has commented on a specific project, being the Julia Creek Vanadium Development in Queensland, but we also have other questions that are asking about either, where do you see future vanadium demand, and a relatively specific question about the $10 price and whether that's significant or not. So Ian, maybe you'd like to comment on future, what you see in future vanadium demand.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I think thanks for the question. So I think perhaps to before I talk about the future position of vanadium, we'll talk about the current position of vanadium, and I think as we're aware, the vanadium price is currently on a bit of a low, and that's largely driven by, I guess, the macroeconomic factors that we're seeing. So we're coming out of, I guess, a lot of parts of the globe sort of near recession environments, so where industrial production is much been lower than we would have liked. So demand has come off, but really importantly, I guess, putting all that into context, is that the Chinese market has continued to grow, and particularly in the vanadium redox flow battery space, a lot of vanadium going into the battery space in China. What's that led to is some new production coming online in China. So there's a combination of some new production in China plus Russian product going into China to be processed, which is currently, obviously through the Ukraine conflict, is not available for the rest of the world. So you've had a lot of additional material coming into the Chinese market, and it was really driven by the expectations around the growth in the batteries, and as happens quite often in commodities, and we saw it in lithium, where the suppliers get a little bit ahead of the demand side, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. So we're seeing growth in the battery side, but the supply side, as we speak right now, has got ahead of that growth. So we're seeing, what is a depressed price in the vanadium market. But what we're also seeing, and it's being reported, I guess very, very consistently at the moment, is a real growth in the vanadium redox flow batteries. So China is certainly the biggest market for that, and we're seeing huge growth there, but we're seeing a lot of other developments around the globe. And so we see that sort of current supply-demand imbalance sort of balancing out over the next little while, and then we certainly see a recovery in the vanadium price as the demand really starts to pick up, and the lack of ability to really put a lot more vanadium into the market, and that's obviously where we want to be positioned for the combined project to move into that market. And we very much believe that the combined project is the one that's closest globally to being able to start to supply vanadium into that market. So we have a very positive outlook on the vanadium price. Touching on, someone's obviously asked about Julia Creek, and there's a large number of large deposits in northwest Queensland that are also moving along a development pathway, and we see a market where all of those projects will be required. So over time, we see there's going to be a massive opportunity in Australia to develop up a whole range of vanadium deposits. We unashamedly believe that our combined project is at the front of that queue, and we'll be the first ones into production, but certainly there's going to be opportunities for a whole range of other projects over time.
Thanks, Ian. The next question that I'll go to is on financing, and again, I'll just group a few similar questions. So there's questions regarding, we've said that certain major shareholders are expected to materially contribute to development costs. So if you want to comment on whether that has changed at all. Also in that funding sort of question, what do we feel about NAIF? And it was specifically asked whether we feel that would be accelerated or more likely if TMT went alone or part of a merged group. And a few other comments just on, is it easier or harder to get financing as a combined group, or is there one advantage on one side or the other? So I'll just throw that open to generally discuss financing with those specific questions in mind here.
Yep, thanks, Shane. I think, starting with our major shareholders, RCF and the institutional shareholders that are on the register, I clearly can't speak for them, and I can't talk about what their plans and expectations are. But we know that they've variably gone on in the public domain talking about expectations of being, wanting to support the development of the vanadium deposits. So I think that's the really important part of the aspect of that. And I know RCF are on the public record talking about their desire to be a supporter of the vanadium sector, and so our expectation is that those shareholders would be there to support the merged entity move through into the development phase. From the NAIF question, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of NAIF, and both the companies have individually been talking to NAIF over the journey. Our expectation, once again, is that as a combined entity, a much more simplified structure, that we would expect not just NAIF, but other federal government agencies would be, available and looking to support the development. I think there's no question that the federal government has put vanadium on the list of a commodity they want to see developed, and the downstream side developed and progressed here in Australia. So we'd imagine that as a combined entity, the ability to attract funding from groups like NAIF or Expert Finance Australia, or those sorts of groups, I think that'd be enhanced as the merged entity. So I think that's a real key advantage to that process. Certainly, I think as a combined group with a much larger market cap and I guess a higher market profile, I touched on that in the presentation. I think that's a distinct advantage for accessing the capital we require. But whether that's equity capital or whether that's strategic partner capital, I think as a merged combined entity, that's a really big advantage for us to look at how we most efficiently and effectively develop the project.
Thanks, Ian. I'll group a few questions again together, which is a few people have asked, what happens if the scheme is not approved when you hold the scheme meeting? Where does TMT go from there? How does the board feel about the position, and what should TMT do after that?
Yeah, look, obviously, I'll start answering that question with the overwhelming unanimous support of the board for the scheme, and our desire that the scheme should be approved, and it's the appropriate thing for us to move forward into that merged entity. In the instance where the scheme is not supported by the shareholders, we've then got a project, the MTMP, which is a strong, viable project in its own as a standalone. So that remains. So that asset doesn't change, and that opportunity doesn't change. What we're talking about through the scheme is to enhance that and to make the development of that combined project more efficient and effective. But if we get to a point where the shareholders say, well, that's not what we want to do, then obviously the board would take that on board and say, well, okay, well, we've got a great project that we will be looking at moving forward in its own right. Now, a whole lot of the things that we've talked about as being advantages for the scheme then fall away. So the access to funding becomes more challenging, which then means the whole process of how quickly you can progress the development of the project then becomes, I guess, again, more challenging. So certainly, we're very strong on the view that the MTMP stands up very well by itself, and so that if the shareholders deem to not support the scheme, and that's obviously what we're doing this process for, to give the shareholders the opportunity to vote on that. But if that's the way the vote goes, then I think we've still got a strong, viable project that has got a pathway forward. But as I would like to reiterate, the scheme and successful completion of the scheme is really about saying we can do that in a much more efficient and effective way.
Thanks, Ian. This one's a bit of a hot topic. I think I've got it in a couple of times now, and it also might be one of those ones where you have to take it on notice. And it's effectively, post-merger, do you expect that there will be a share consolidation of some form?
I think you'd have to take that one on notice, and that's certainly an AVL post-merger board decision rather than something that we could talk about in this forum, I would have thought.
So just to make that clear to everyone, there's no decisions being made on that, and it would be a post-merger consideration. Speaking on the merger, this is another question that we've received. How long has the merger proposal been under discussion? So
as stated in the presentation, I think it was the 11th of August, when AVL first approached us with a non-binding indicative offer. So that was the first time when we were approached. It's fair to say over the years, there's been thoughts around, is there an opportunity to consolidate the ore body? Because we've seen that as a technically logical thing to do, to develop the ore body as one. But this scheme and the whole process, it commenced with a non-binding indicative offer on the 11th of August 2023.
Thanks, Ian. Just talking briefly about timetable. Again, I've got a few questions about timetable implications if there's, something happens, so a superior proposal emerges or something is changed. What would be the timetable implications? Again, that may be a how long's a piece of string question, and presumably the timetable would be impacted, but I don't know if you can give any more colour on how much it would be impacted.
Yeah, not really, Shane. I think there's so many different variables in that process. We're currently on track to have our shareholder meeting, which has been approved by the courts, on the 16th of January 2024. What may happen between now and then and the impacts of that are pretty hard to speculate upon, I would have thought. But you're right. There may well be, if there's something that occurs, if there's a superior proposal or something else that happens, then there's processes under the scheme implementation deed, which we would then go through, which may have an impact on that timeline.
Thanks, Rob. And we've also had a few relatively technical questions and timeline questions, mostly around, when would a TMTBFS be completed? When would you need to do 2 DFSs? Would you need to do 1 DFS? To the extent that you can, would you like to sort of discuss post-merger implications for studies and timelines?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, thanks, Shane. So look, I think we put it into the announcement on the 25th of September around bringing this working group together and the ability then to take what is both very advanced sets of data from both companies and integrate that. And that's what the process has begun. We started that at the end of September, and that group's been meeting on a regular basis, covering up on a whole range of matters, both sort of technical plus approvals and social matters, the whole process that is required. So it's our belief at the moment that we've got such a great level of data from both sides that once that's integrated, we'll be in a relatively short period of time be able to bring together a combined study that says this is what the development looks like and the best way to develop and maximise the benefits of this combined project.
Thanks, Ian. I have one question on water in the project area. I don't know if you want to comment on the availability or otherwise of water in the area. Yeah.
Sure, it's quite a technical question, Shane, but for this in this forum. But I think for TMT shareholders who have been following us for a while, they'll know that we've identified and defined a bore field to the north of the Gabanitha proposed processing plant site. That is included within the Gabanitha ERD that's in the EPA process at the moment. So there is a defined bore field to provide processed water. That all part of the studies and the work we've been doing. So I'm not sure if that answers the question specifically, but certainly that's the work we've done, and that water would be available to the combined project development.
Thanks. We'll just have a look at now, just reading through, trying to combine some of these questions. I think we've covered all the questions on studies. Do you want to just talk to us about, your view on seeking partners? Obviously AVL and TMT will become one. What's your sort of view on, seeking partners and how that might work to help or otherwise develop the project?
Yeah, absolutely, Shane. So I think, as I touched on in the presentation, TMT has been going through a process of looking to engage with strategic investors and other parties around supporting and being involved in the development of the project. I'm not up to speed with what the AVL side, but I assume there's similar conversations. So as a merged entity, there's one voice, there's one group that goes out. We've certainly had experience where we're talking to parties that are have been confused. So which part of the ore body are you talking about, and you know, which company? So by putting it together, there's one voice talking about developing one ore body, and so that engagement with whether it's corporates, whether it's end users, offtake parties, whether it's financiers, having that one voice talking about one deposit, and you know, arguably the most advanced and you know, closest to development vanadium project in the world, that one voice really, I think, will be a massive advantage for, you know, engagement with those groups to bring the project through.
Thanks, Ian. And I just should note we're getting close to the end of our time here. Again, a little technical question, and it's an earlier one. Are you considering using a third party for logistic shipping, i.e. someone like Phoenix?
Again, I think that is quite quite a technical detail question, and yeah. Look, you know, we've as a TMT shareholder, you'll know that we completed our integration study last August, and you know, part of that was bringing Orebody into the MTMP and looking at particularly for our set of circumstances, exporting an ilmenite product for a period of time. So yes, we certainly engaged with a range of logistic partners, both on the trucking, the port side, plus shipping around the ilmenite product. So we've certainly done a lot of work in that space, and you know, going forward, there'll be ongoing work as a combined entity on what that logistics pathway looks like.
Yeah. And Ian, perhaps as we're getting again towards the end of our time, would you like to comment on the nature of the ore body? And again, maybe this still needs some technical review, but obviously, you know, there's a lot of commentary about, you know, is the ore body different? Is it contiguous? What's the differences? I don't know if you want to give a view there. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it is one contiguous ore body. So you know, geologically, it's one contiguous unit. Now, what does vary in that is, and probably getting a bit too technical for some perhaps, is the oxidation profile. So there is variable depths of weathering throughout the ore body, and so you know, how we develop the ore body and how we maximise, I guess the value of the ore body will take all that into account. And you know, I guess the reality is it is one ore body, but there are some variable, I guess, metallurgical characteristics that are linked back to the weathering profile. But again, by putting it all together, we have the best way to maximise the value of the ore body as it stands. So that's, you know, I guess that's the real key of what we're doing.
Thanks, Ian and Joe. We have reached the end of the time for the webinar, so I might just hand it back if there's any final closing comments that you would like to make, or if you wanted to again discuss, you know, why the board has recommended the scheme.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I think you know, again, really importantly, the reasons for shareholders to vote for and against the scheme are all outlined in the scheme booklet. So really encourage you to read the scheme booklet before you place your votes. There will be personalised scheme booklets being dispatched. I think it's by next Wednesday. So you'll start to see those come through in your inbox or your letterbox over the course of the back half of next week. So you know, please make sure you read that and get familiar with that, and then ask whatever questions you need to ask beyond that. But I guess that, again, you know, in there, the independent expert view that the scheme is in the best interest of TMT shareholders, and it does provide the ability to develop the projects and access capital as a combined entity, which is much more straightforward than as the two individual entities. So I think, you know, there's a lot of detail in there. So, but please really get in there and understand it. You know, we look forward to you know, moving through this process and coming out the other side and really, you know, getting back into developing our world-class project.
Thanks very much, and that concludes today's webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for joining today.